Hello, Chad Wilhelm here with Return the Remnant Ministry, and today do I have a story to tell for you. I probably would not have touched this subject 2 years ago, but in the past 2 years, my wife and I have done a lot of studying on the Nephilim and the sons of God, and so I felt it was the proper time to do a teaching on this. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. The Nephilim. Before I begin, I want to just kind of make a disclaimer here that I know that there's varying opinions on this subject matter, and this is only my opinion. And this is only the tip of the iceberg, because what I want people to get from this teaching is for you to spur yourselves on to dig and to uncover more of this stuff for yourself. So in light of that, even though there's a lot of information in here, this is still only an introduction into the subject matter. Here's the crux of the matter. I don't know how many times you've gone through and read Genesis 6, 1 through 4. We're going to read it today, and then we're going to talk about it. So Genesis 6, 1 through 4 says that when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then Yahweh said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men, Gibborim in Hebrew, who were of old, the men of renown. And if we take a look, we know that Yeshua had something to say about this. Messiah Yeshua in the Gospels is recorded by Matthew chapter 24, verse 37. It says, For as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. So Yeshua is basically telling us, go back to see what was going on in the days of Noah. And if we turn our Bibles back to Genesis chapter 6, right after Genesis 6, 1 through 4, we read what was going on. And it is written, And Elohim saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented Yahweh that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And Yahweh said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls in the air, for it repented me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of Yahweh. So, what's going on here? We see some very strange verses here concerning these sons of God. And who were they? And we're going to be going through exclusively today, going through and talking about who they were and who the Nephilim were. If we take a look here in Genesis 6:4, going back a few verses where it says, and I'm using the NASB, it says here that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So, what is this word Nephilim? If we go into the Hebrew, we see that this word is Nephil, meaning, basically meaning a bully or a tyrant or a giant. We get that out of the Strongs and out of the Brown Driver Briggs. We get giants, the Nephilim. If we take a look here, who are the Nephilim? There are several people out there that are claiming to know the Hebrew, and they're going to tell you that the Hebrew root word of Nephilim is Nephal. And what they'll say is that this root word has a connotation of to fall down. But it wasn't the Nephilim that fell down. Okay? The Nephilim are not the ones that fell down. It's the sons of God, aka the watchers, that fell. These angels, these angelic beings that sinned and came down to the earth. Now, interestingly, if we go into the Aramaic, the noun Nephil does exist. And it simply means giant. And it makes sense why the Septuagint, and I would highly encourage you, if you don't have a Brenton's 1831 Septuagint, I'd highly encourage you to get that in your library and use that as another text to go along with your King James or whatever Bible that you have, which more than likely comes from a 9th century Common Era Masoretic text, and have that other Bible there as another study tool, another study aid. So back into the Aramaic again, it simply means giant, and it makes sense why the Septuagint translated the Nephilim as gigantes, which means giant. So who were these Nephilim? Well, we can deduce so far that the Nephilim are the offspring of the fallen ones, not of the children of Adam or the children of mankind, but of the offspring of angels cohabitating with human women, a race of Nephilim, a race of giants. And we're going to go in and this, I'm going to talk about why I believe this is so. So don't take my word for it, study this out for yourselves. But taking what we have learned and what we're going to learn today, we can make a case that the angels produced something that God did not sanction. Yahweh Elohim is the creator, not the fallen angels. So this statement that I just made here, can we find other sources that can verify this statement, that can back up what I just said? And we're going to get back on this in just a minute. But what I want to do is I want to quote something out of Derek Gilbert's book, The Great Inception, and he's quoting something from Michael Heiser. So again, Nephilim does not come from the root word nephal, which we think it is. But let's take a look at this here. In The Great Inception, page 33, quoting Dr. Michael Heiser, who says the following. And actually, just real quickly, Dr. Michael Heiser is an ancient language scholar. He's a Bible scholar and an ancient language scholar. And he writes the following, that the form Nephilim cannot mean fallen ones. The spelling would then be Nephilim, with the Phulim. Likewise, Nephilim does not mean those who fall or those who fall away. That would be Nephilim. The only way in Hebrew to get Nephilim from Nephal by the rules of Hebrew morphology, which is another term for saying word formation, would be to presume a noun spelled Nephil and then pluralize it. I say presume, since this noun does not exist in biblical Hebrew. Unless one counts Genesis 6:4 and Numbers 13:33, these are the only two occurrences that we find of the word Nephilim in our Tanakh. But that would then be assuming what one is trying to prove. However, in Aramaic, the noun Nephil does exist. It means giant, making it easy to see why the Septuagint, which again is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, it's easy to see why the Septuagint translated Nephilim as gigantes, or giant. So let's go back and read, again, Genesis 6:1-4. And when we read it literally, and we don't take all the biased opinions of people who went to seminaries and just read the text for what it says, it becomes a lot more apparent. Again, Genesis 6:1-4. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, and the sons of God in here in context is B'nai Elohim. Okay, fallen angelic beings, we're going to see this, sons of God in Hebrews, B'nai Elohim, and we're going to show why it can only be this and not what we've been told through various sources. That the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives many they chose. Then Yahweh said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he has flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The giants, or the Nephilim, and the Nephilim are basically the outcome of this cohabitation of the sons of God, fallen angelic beings, mating with the daughters of mankind, were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And as I said before, there's many translations of the Bible that interpret this Hebrew word Nephilim correctly as giants. If you have a 1611 King James version, it's there as giants. The Bible Word of Yahweh Bible the LBP, the Holy Bible from the ancient Eastern texts, the Aramaic of the Peshitta, the Latin Vulgate. They have Gigantes, giants, the Interlinear Bible, the ABP, the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. We have it in the Septuagint Bible. We have it in the Bishop's Bible of 1568, the Geneva Bible of 1587, and many others that have correctly identified Nephilim as giants. So, in my opinion, I believe the Nephilim are the offspring of the fallen angels cohabitating with the daughters of men. But again, let's take a look at the three predominant views within Christianity and Judaism. And as I said at the beginning of this teaching, 2 years ago I wouldn't have made that statement until I studied out for myself, because when I looked at these scriptures, I didn't really understand them like I do today. So the three theories that we have are that the Nephilim are sons of rulers, or the sons of Seth, or the sons of fallen angelic beings. So let's jump into these. The one of the view that the sons of God were the sons of kings or rulers, that they were the pre-flood kings, the sons of pre-flood kings of the earth, who married with the daughters of men, and the daughters of men that being that of the common people. This is something that is predominant in modern Judaism. They adhere to the offspring of Seth, being that the sons of God were the pre-flood kings of the earth who married the daughters of men. This view became the predominant explanation of rabbinical Judaism after Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. He was a second century Common Era rabbi who pronounced a curse upon the Jews who believed the common teaching, get this, the common teaching at the time, that the angels brought forth or created the Nephilim. Now, interestingly, this view of Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai was upheld and taught by two of the most respected Jewish sages of the Middle Ages, and everybody pretty much knows Rashi, and also Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. And this is why it stayed and became the standard interpretation of rabbinical Judaism even up to today. And if you go into Wikipedia, you'll see that the sons of God being angels is, quote, non-existent in modern Judaism. This is reflected by the rejection of Enoch, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and other apocrypha supporting the second interpretation from the Hebrew biblical canon, which is the fallen angels. So that was the first theory. The second one is probably a more held theory than the first one. But the sons of Seth theory basically states that the sons of God were the sons of Seth, Seth being the godly line that we read about in Genesis chapter 5, that eventually mated with the daughters of Cain. That Cain's line was this ungodly line. And interestingly, this theory did not originate or take hold. Well, actually, it originated by Julius Africanus around he lived 160 to 240 Common Era. So right around the latter part of the 2nd century current era, this theory originated. And then St. Augustine of Hippo embraced this Sethite theory. And this is late in the 4th century. And then early in the 5th century, he came out with a book called The City of God. And he's basically put this in his book that when he was talking about Genesis 6:4, he's explaining that it's the line of Seth with the line of Cain. So the sons of Seth and the daughters of Cain. And that became the predominant Greek Orthodox view well into the Middle Ages. Later, it was embraced by predominant pastors of the day like John Calvin in the 17th century. And it is pretty much a predominant view taught in many religious institutions to this day. So those are the first two. Now, I want to share a couple things before I get into the third thought process of the sons of the gods being the Nephilim, being the fathers being angels. If we take a look at the sons of Seth theory, number one, the text says nothing about the sons of Seth mating with the daughters of Cain, nor is the phrase sons of God ever used to describe Israelites or believers of God within the text of the Tanakh. And when we look at Genesis 6:4, when we see sons of God, we know that Seth was not a son of God in how it's the Tanakh is showing sons of God, but that Seth was a son of Adam. If we take a look at number 3, the third point here, the daughters of men being that the daughters of Cain, the Hebrew text states that the daughters of man in the Hebrew would be Adam. And we see also that, number 4, many extra non-biblical texts identify the sons of God as being angels. And we're going to show that in a couple future slides here. And number 5, the common view before St. Augustine was that the sons of God were in fact divine angelic beings. If we go back to Derek Gilbert's book, The Great Inception, he writes in here, in short, the Sethite view is that the sons of God were men from the godly, righteous line of Seth who began intermarrying with women from the corrupt, wicked line of Cain. And frankly, this defies logic on several points. Number 1, how likely is it that all the Sethite men were good while all the Canaanite women were bad? Canaanite being the women, the daughters of Cain. Number 2, we're supposed to believe Canaanite men never married Sethite women? Number 3, why would these unions produce Nephilim, understood to be giants by Jewish rabbis and early Christians alike? Number 4, why would these unions lead to wickedness so great that God had to wipe out everything that walked the earth except Noah, his family, and the creatures in the ark? And number 5, every other use of B'nai Elohim in the Hebrew Scriptures refers to divine beings. And I think I have a slide on that. We're going to see in the so-called Old Testament, more appropriately called the Tanakh, every time we see B'nai Ha-Elohim, B'nai Elim, B'nai Elohim, these instances in Scripture all are referring to angelic beings. Let's talk about the sons of God theory. Number 1, that in fact Genesis 6:1 through 4, the sons of God is in reference to the fallen angelic beings who came to earth and mated with the daughters of humankind. Number 2, many extra non-biblical texts identify the sons of God as being angels, and we're going to talk about that in the next couple slides here. Number 3, many early Christian writers believe that the sons of God, as we see here in Genesis 6:1 through 4, were in fact fallen angels. And there are plenty of big names here. We have Eusebius, Origen, Justin Martyr, Commodianus, Clement of Alexandria, Josephus, Philo, Tertullian, and many others. And if we take a look, number 4, when we read Genesis 3:14 through 15, we see that there's a seed war going on. Very, very important to understand that there is a war going on right now, folks. And there's a battle between the seed of the serpent, which would represent those of Satan, and the seed of the woman, who will eventually bring forth Yeshua, the Messiah, right? So we've got that going on. And number 5, earlier translations of the Bible, such as Codex Alexandrinus, which is a 5th century Common Era document, shows the sons of God as angels in the text. We also see that in Codex Vaticanus, which is an even earlier manuscript, 4th century. And they translate that as angels, sons of God as angels. Now, if we take a look in the Bible here in our Tanakh, we see that there are several places where we have sons of God. We have it here in Genesis 6:4. Later we see in Job chapter 1 verse 6, chapter 2 verse 1, chapter 38 verse 7, and also in Deuteronomy 32 verse 8. There is some other ones that we'll get to here in a minute, but let's just take a look at these and see what they have to say concerning the sons of God. If we take a look at Job chapter 1 verse 6, it says, Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan came also among them. Now, I have to ask you a question. If you adhere to the sons of Seth theory, Were the sons of Seth present in the divine council of Yahweh? Did they come before Yahweh along with Satan to present themselves? I don't think so. We see in the next chapter of Job, chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan came also among them to present himself before Yahweh." Again, it's a house of cards if you hold on to the sons of Seth theory. It doesn't fit the biblical narrative. If we take a look at Job chapter 38, verses 3 through 7, when Yahweh is speaking back to Job, Yahweh says the following here. He says, "Gird up now your loins like a man, for I will demand of you, and you answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who has laid the measures thereof, if you know? Or who has stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Again, if the sons of Seth is what's being talked about in Genesis 6:4, were the sons of Seth at creation of the earth? No, of course not. And you can't follow that type of reasoning. That's just not, it does not line up with the biblical text. If we look at each scriptural reference in the Tanakh where we see B'nai Elohim, it's in regards to the angels. There's no instances within the Tanakh where the phrase sons of God refers to men. Now here's what E.W. Bullinger has to say about these sons of God in Appendix 23 to the Companion Bible. He writes the following: "This is why angels are called sons of God in every other place where the expression is issued in the Old Testament. We have no authority or right to take the expression in Genesis 6:4 in any other sense. Moreover, in Genesis 6:2, the Septuagint renders it angels." You can find this on pages 26 and 27, the Companion Bible Appendixes. We also see some extra non-biblical texts that identify the sons of God as being angels within the Genesis 6, 1 through 4 context. Now, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the book of Jubilees, if you're familiar with Enoch, if you're familiar with the book of Yasher, Sefer HaYasher. I'm not saying that these books should be canonized. However, if they line up and support the biblical narrative, then there's something that we definitely need to take a look at. And if we take a look at Jubilees chapter 5, 1 through 2, we read the following: "And it came to pass, when the children of men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the angels of God saw them on a certain year of this Jubilee, that they who were beautiful to look upon, and they took themselves wives of all whom they chose, and they bare unto them sons, and they were giants." First Enoch chapter 6, verses 1 through 3, it is written, "And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children." So we see in a couple of non-biblical texts, sons of God are being identified as angels. If we take a look at Jubilees, there's a recap that we see in Noah's recap. It's in chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. It is written here: "For owing to these three things came the flood upon the earth, namely, owing to the fornication wherein the watchers you're going to understand are those that are the fallen angels, wherein the watchers against the law of their ordinances." So the angels that are in heaven have a set of rules and regulations that Yahweh has put upon them. And we see that some of these fell. Why they fall? Because they went against the law of their ordinances. And they went a-whoring after the daughters of men, and took themselves wives of all which they chose, and they made the beginning of uncleanness. And they begat sons, the Nephilim. And they were all unlike, and they devoured one another. And the giant slew the Nephil, and the Nephil slew the Eleio, and the Eleio mankind. All these are different types of early Nephilim, of early class giants. and one man another. And everyone sold himself to work iniquity and to shed much blood, and the earth was filled with iniquity. So we see out of Jubilees, out of Sefer Yasher or Jasher, and also the book of Enoch, we see that the sons of God are in fact the watchers or fallen angels. Now, if we take a look and go and take a look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see a fragment that was found in Cave 4 and also Cave 1 and 2 and 6, some fragments that that also hold up to this theory that the sons of God were in fact angels, fallen angels. And the Book of Giants is basically an apocryphal Jewish book which expands a narrative in the Hebrew Bible. And these fragments that were found were dated before the 2nd century BCE. And on this slide here, I have several different fragments. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but it says here, here's a summary statement of the descent of the wicked angels, bringing both knowledge and havoc. And you can compare this to Genesis 6, 1 through 2, and also verse 4. It says, they knew the secrets of ... sin was great in the earth ... and they killed many ... they begat giants. We also see the outcome of the demonic corruption was violence, perversion, and a brood of monstrous beings. So we can compare this fragment to Genesis 6:4. This is fragment 2 found in Qumran Cave 4. It says, they defiled, they begot giants and monsters. They begot, and behold, all the earth was corrupted with its blood and by the hand of giants, which did not suffice for them, and they were seeking to devour many. And it's also talking about the monsters attacked it. There are several fragments here talking about this narrative in this book called the Book of Giants, found in the Dead Sea caves at Qumran. We also know that there was unnatural acts of bestiality. We see that in another cave, Cave 1, there was a couple fragments that said there was 200 donkeys, 200 rams, 200 goats. These different types of animals, from beasts of the field, from every animal, from every bird, for miscegenation. So we see that there was a lot of wickedness going on before the flood. We also can see early commentary of Genesis 6 identifies the sons of God as divine beings or angels. If we look at Philo, in his book, Questions and Answers on Genesis, Book 1, point 92, he writes, quote, but he relates that these giants were sprung from a combined procreation of two natures, namely from angels and mortal women. But sometimes Moses styles the angels the sons of God. In Clement, who was a disciple of Peter, in his excerpt from the homily book, number 8, chapter 13, he quotes in here, they, being the fallen angels, fell into cohabitation with women. Josephus also writes in the Antiquities, Book 1, chapter 3, he says, for many angels of God accompanied with women, and begat sons that proved unjust, and despisers of all that was good, on account of the confidence that they had in their own strength. For the tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians call giants. So, before I continue, one thing that I try and do, I don't want to know what modern, well, I do, but not, I don't put a huge amount of weight in it. I don't want to just know what modern scholars believe of something that happened 2, 3, 5,000 years ago. I want to go back in time, and I want to go back to some of the earliest writings to see what they thought. And this is what I'm doing here. You can see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, earlier non-biblical apocryphal books, early commentaries, we see that the sons of God are being described as angels. So many early Christian writers accepted the story told in Enoch as fact. Justin Martyr, who lived from 110 Common Era to 165, had this to say in chapter 5 of his second apology entitled How the Angels Transgressed. And this is out of page 363, volume 1 of the Ante-Nicene Fathers. And he writes here, God, when he had made the whole world and subjected things earthly to man, and arranged the heavenly elements for the increase of fruits and rotation of the seasons, and appointed this divine law, for these things also he evidently made for man, committed the care of men and all things under heaven to angels whom he appointed over them. But the angels transgressed this appointment, and were captivated by love of women, and begat children, who are those that are called demons. And besides, they afterwards subdued the human race to themselves, partly by magical writings, and partly by fears and punishments. They occasioned, and partly by teaching them to offer sacrifices. And I'm going to tell you, it's huge about the blood sacrifices and the cannibalism. Incense and libations, of which things they stood in need after they enslaved by lustful passions. And among men they sowed murders, wars, adulteries, intemperate needs, and all wickedness. We see another commentary here. This is Commodianus, who was a North African bishop who lived in the 3rd century Common Era, right around 240. In his book on the worship of demons, chapter 3, he says the following here. When Almighty God, to beautify the nature of the world, willed that the earth should be visited by angels, when they were sent down, they despised his laws. Such was the beauty of women that it turned them aside, so that being contaminated, they could not return to heaven. Rebels from God, they uttered words against him. Then the highest uttered his judgment against them, and from their seed giants are said to have been born. And I could continue on, but I think you get the point with that. So we take a look here in Genesis 6, we see a recap here, and we can see how non-canonized books, apocryphal books, that of Enoch, Jubilees, and Jasher, we can see how they sync up with the narrative in Genesis chapter 6. We see in the Bible, Genesis 6, 1 through 4, that angels are mating with humans. The sons of God are in fact angels. If we take a look at 1st Enoch and Jubilees, that syncs right up with it, that they also are in agreement with Genesis 6, 1 through 4, being angels, mating with humans, producing giants, aka Nephilim. We see in verses 5 through 7 of Genesis 6 how God feels about this resulting violence that is now in the earth. And that also syncs up with 1st Enoch and Jubilees. Verses 8 through 10 of Genesis 6, we see the Bible is showing us, it's revealing how Noah and his sons were genetically pure. And we're going to get to that in a minute. This also syncs up with Jasher and the book of Jubilees. Verses 11 and 12, we see that all the earth and flesh becomes corrupted. That's also found in Jasher chapter 4 and Jubilees chapter 5. Then in verse 13 through 17, God grows increasingly angry and tells Noah to build the ark and how to do that. And we see that that's not only found in the Bible, but it's also found in Jasher and Jubilees. And oh, by the way, several biblical flood accounts can be traced all around the world in different terms, in different terminology, and they may not be exactly correct, but there is a flood narrative that can be found on pretty much every continent on the earth. Then we see one of the last verses here. In verse 18, not the end of the chapter, but in verse 18, we see the first mention of the wives of Noah's 3 sons. And this also syncs up with Jasher chapter 5. And according to Jasher, we see that Noah chose the 3 wives just 7 days before the flood came. So very, very one thing I wanted to also share with you when it says that Noah found grace. Let's see if I can find that here. When it says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahweh. If you take a look at the Paleo-Hebrew for grace, which is chen, the chet nun, you can see that the nun is like a seed, and the chet almost looks like a DNA matrix. So if you actually looked in the Paleo-Hebrew, when it says that Noah found grace or favor in the eyes of Yahweh, that Noah found chen, you will see that even within his name, with his name and also the grace aspect, you see a continuance of seed, but the seed of the DNA matrix that God created on the earth with Adam and through Adam until it, eventually became corrupted. But we actually see that in the Paleo-Hebrew. When you take a look at the two letters that make up the word Noach, we see the Nun, which is a seed, looks like the male seed, and then we have the Chet, which in the Paleo-Hebrew looks like a DNA matrix. I don't have that slide, but you'll have to look at that and take a look for yourself. So now we're going to talk just briefly about the types of giants that we can find in our Bibles. So we see the Nephilim, and the Nephilim we see are listed in Genesis 6:4 and also Numbers 13:33 when the spies toured the land of Israel and came back with that report. We also see from the Nephilim there are other classes of giants called the Rephaim, the Zuzim, the Amim, and the Anakim. So let's break down and take a look at those. Remember, back in Genesis 6:4, it says that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. I don't believe that the angels, because we read in the book of Enoch that the judgment was so severe on the angels that fell that I highly doubt any other angel after the flood would have done something so stupid as to come down and follow suit with what the Watchers did earlier, based on what punishment was handed out upon the Watchers. So we see that the Nephilim were on the earth pre-flood, and then they re-emerged again post-flood. And I'm going to give you a strong possibility as to how that happened. But we also understand that the ancient sages believed that the Nephilim had many names. And in rabbinic literature, the rabbis concede that these giants had many names. They were called Amim because whoever saw one of them was seized with terror, because Amim means terrors. Rephaim because their sight made people soft, or made them fearful like wax. Gibborim because their brains alone were just huge brains. Zamzumim because they inspired fear and were fierce warriors. Anakim because they wore huge necklaces in great numbers. Avim because they destroyed the world and were themselves destroyed. And Nephilim because they caused the world to fall and fell themselves. You can get that out of Berachot. I think that's in chapter number 27, I think, in 27. We also know that several rows of teeth were also attributed to giants. And we know that once, according to the rabbinic literature of old, that they were alleged to eat as many as 1,000 oxen and horses and camels. And basically they were consuming the earth, and when all those were exhausted, they started to eat human beings. Find that very interesting. Whether that's true or not, we don't really know. But here's the two scriptures again, where we have Nephilim, Genesis 6:4 and Numbers 13:33. If you take a look here, this is something I end up finding off of the internet. Later figured out it came from Rob Skiba. If you go to his website, robschannel.com, I think you'll see this chart that he or somebody he knew put together. And if you take a look at the average size of man, about 6 feet, and then you take a look at Og, king of Bashan, and Goliath, you notice that not only when they grow up, they also grow out. You can see that. And so when we read Numbers 13:33, when it says, we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, or come of the Nephilim, we were in our own sight as grasshoppers. So, you get somebody that tall, they would look pretty small. We would look very small to someone of a large size giant. If we take a look at the Rephaim, another class of Nephilim, in the Brown Driver Briggs definition, we see giants, Rephaim, an old tribe of giants. We see in Genesis 14, when there was the war of the kings of the north against the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, it says that Chedorlaomer, this king of the north, and the kings that were allied with him, they came down and they smote the Rephaims, and they also smote the Zuzims and the Emims. And interestingly, all three of these are giant classes. And when you read in the book of Jasher, you find out that when you have a 1,000,000-man army, which that's what's recorded in the book of Jasher, just the sheer numbers should be enough to, take out giants that may be, 500 giants that are 15 feet tall. We don't know. We don't have all the information on that. If we look at Genesis 15, it says that Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham, saying that unto your seed I have given this land. And he's listing all these peoples, and one of those peoples living in the land at the time was the Rephaim. Again, a giant class of the Nephilim. We also see a land of the giants, which Og, king of Bashan, was still in control over before the children of Israel came and took him out. In Deuteronomy 3:13, it says, the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, being the kingdom of Og, gave I unto the half-tribe of Manasseh, all the region of Argob and all Bashan, which was called the land of the giants, land of Rephaim. So we see another area here, a scripture here in Joshua chapter 15, verse 8, when he's laying out the land. He's giving some inheritance to one of the tribes, and one of the borders was at the valley of the giants of the Rephaim. Another class of giants called the Zuzim. The Brown Driver Briggs meaning for Zuzim means roving creatures. But according to the Brown Driver Briggs, the location of the Zuzim is probably in the territory of the Ammonites, east of the Jordan, on the other side of the Jordan River. Site uncertain. But they also put in here the Zuzim are also thought to be giants. Well, we know that they were giants because if we go into the Torah, if we go into the books of the law, what Moses wrote in Deuteronomy 2:19 through 21, he writes the following: And when you, Israel, come over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them, for I will not give you of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given unto the children of Lot for possession. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Ammonites called them Zamzumims, a people great and many and tall as the Anakims. So Zamzumims, again, comes from that same root word for Zuzim. Yahweh destroyed them before them, and they succeeded them and dwelt in their stead. So Zuzim and Zamzumims are basically the same thing. Another type of giant, the Emims. The Emims in the Brown Driver Briggs means terrors. They lived east of the Salt Sea, so again, on the other side of the Jordan River, where Moab will eventually inhabit, thought to be giants also. Again, Deuteronomy 2:9 through 11, Moses has in here that the Emims dwelt therein in times past, a people great and many and tall as the Anakims, which also were accounted giants as the Anakims, but the Moabites called them Emims. So we see the Emims here also a giant class of the Nephilim. And then we also have the Anakim. The Anakim comes from the root word anak, meaning neck. And they write in here, they comment the following. They say that the Anak is a progenitor of a family or tribe of the giant people in Canaan. And we can take a look and see when the spies were sent out in Numbers 13 to spy out the land, it says that they ascended by the south from the Negev, and they came unto Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. And then they came back, and they told the children of Israel, they gave them a report, and they said, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, come of the Nephilim. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So we see that there. We see it again in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 2, when Moses is given his discourse for the history of what was going on with the wanderings of the children of Israel. We also know later when Israel goes into the land, we read that Joshua, chapter 15, 13, and 14, that we see Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, gave him the city of Arba, the father of Anak, which is Hebron. It says, and Caleb drove out, or basically in Hebrew destroyed, the three sons of Anak. Those same sons that the children of Israel saw and were scared of back in Numbers 13, these same three, Caleb destroyed them. Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the children of Anak. And again, where are we seeing these giants? We're seeing them after the flood, folks. After the flood, not only before, but after, which we get in 1 Chronicles 24 through 8, and also 2 Samuel 21:15 through 22. You'll see that these four were born to the giant in Gath. These four were born to the Rephaim, the giant in Gath. That giant is none other than Goliath, in my opinion. So let's get back to the flood. Why the flood? What were some of the reasons for the flood? And we can see through the text and also through the Apocrypha and other commentaries that there was much evil on the earth, and there was a corruption of God's creation, of man and animals, and I believe there was a mixing of DNA. I mean, think about it now. In Genesis 6, if the sons of God indeed are the watchers, the fallen angels, and they're cohabitating with humans, there is a mixing of DNA going on. And what's happening then is that's bringing forth giants or Nephilim. And now we have the Nephilim pre-flood mixing their DNA with that of humankind and still bringing forth Rephaim, Anakim, Zamzumim, Amims, etc., etc. So how again did the giants return after the flood? This is one reason why. According to Enoch, there wasn't a second incursion of fallen angels. And as I had kind of talked about earlier, it was mainly because of the severe judgment passed down from God to the watchers, to the fallen ones. And we also know that in Genesis 6 that Noah was Tamim, that he was genetically pure, and that before the flood there's a possibility that the wives of his three sons could have had mixed DNA. They could have had a genetic marker in it. We don't have all the information, but there must have been some kind of genetic marker from the Nephilim that was passed along, went into the boat, survived the flood, and then this genetic marker started to reappear again, mainly through Ham's line, possibly through the other two sons as well, through Japheth and Seth. But we see it mainly through Ham's line. And this would explain the giants that appeared after the flood. Remember that the flood destroyed all flesh on the earth except Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives. Again, Genesis 6:4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. After what? After the flood. That's what we see going on. So, was there another case of fallen angels mating with women after the flood? Again, as I said, I don't believe so. According to the book of Enoch, we know that the judgment from God was so severe on the fallen angels that there wasn't another angel incursion upon humankind. And we see that all flesh was destroyed except Noah and his family, along with the animals in the ark. And as I stated earlier, could there have been a mixing of DNA with the wives of Noah's children? Don't know, only speculating. Now, if we look at this slide here, again, found this on Google Images and traced it back and found that it was an image that was presented by Rob Skiba. I believe it's on his website, seedtheseries.com. And we get an idea here of DNA mixing between that of a fallen male angel and that of a normal female. And we see the possibilities that could come from that. Because remember where we've got our DNA from. Our DNA was given to us by Adam from God. When God created Adam, there was a different type of DNA structure, different DNA matrix than that of the angels. Now, if we come about with a Nephilim female or a Nephilim male, that would be the offspring from a fallen angel and that of a human female. There's some possibilities here which then you bring a Nephilim male with another human female, you have lots of different problems and a continuing of a giant race that could come from it. We don't see as much of it. We didn't see much of it back then because I think eventually it was kind of maybe bred out. I don't have an answer for you on that. But there's still a recessive gene, I think, within some of our DNA. So why then did God want Israel to utterly destroy all the inhabitants of Canaan? And this is a question I think many people have trouble understanding. This is the crux of the matter. When you hear someone say, why was the God of the Old Testament such an evil God? Why did he destroy all those people, women, children, animals, everything? Well, I think a few years back, a lot of people wouldn't have an answer. But when you start looking at the Genesis 6:4 narrative, and you start to see the cohabitation of fallen angels with earthly women and the resulting offspring being giants, and these giant classes that were living in the land of Israel, and in the surrounding areas. We just talked about what Moses was talking about with the Anakims and the Rephaims, the Amims, the Zamzumims. These are all giant classes. And we see here in Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 3, says, when Yahweh your Elohim shall bring you into the land where you go to possess it, and you have cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you, and when Yahweh your Elohim shall deliver them before you, you shall smite them and utterly destroy them. Neither shall you make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them, neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughter you shall not give unto his son, nor his daughter shall you take unto your son. And in my opinion, the reason why this is here is because of the remnant of giants and mixed DNA that Yahweh wanted to eradicate. Remember, if we go back to Genesis 3:15, the seed war between Hazatan and mankind. Where do you think Hazatan is going to put his chess pieces at? He's going to put those giants, those people, that offspring in the land to counteract and counterattack what Yahweh is going to bring into that land. That land is so important because that land was given to our ancestors, to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Yaakov. And the enemy is doing everything he can to keep Israel from obtaining the land. So again, it's because the remnant of giants and mixed DNA that was in the land that Yahweh wanted to eradicate. And Yahweh used his people, he used Am Yisrael, to defeat the giants so that the world would fear them and fear their Elohim, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Yahweh would ultimately get the glory through his people, Israel. This is why we see there's a reason. There's a reason behind everything that Yahweh says. And sometimes we have to really study it and uncover things to find out the reasoning behind what he did. That helps a lot of people understand why Yahweh commanded Israel to do what he wanted them to do with wiping out these people, these Nephilim in the land. So how was Israel then able to defeat these giants, these people larger and mightier and more powerful than them? And the reason being is because our God is a God of covenant. And when you see in Genesis 15, God makes a covenant with Abraham. If we read the following here in Genesis 15, 18 through 21, it says, in the same day Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto your seed have I given this land. And that land being the land of Israel. And he's talking about, he's also given these people over to them. These Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaims, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, Jebusites. The majority of them were they're all living in the land of Israel. Not all the Hittites, but there was a lot of the Hittite kingdom more than likely extended into the land of Canaan. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read Numbers 33, 51 through 55, but you should take a look at that. If we take a look at Deuteronomy 1, verse 8, Moses says here, "Behold, I have set the land before you. Go in and possess the land which Yahweh swore unto your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give unto them and to their seed after them." And we know what happens. I'm going to read that in Joshua chapter 1. Yahweh gives a charge to Joshua, Yehoshua. He says the following: "It came about after the death of Moses, the servant of Yahweh, that Yahweh spoke to Yehoshua the son of Nun, Moshe's servant, saying, Moshe my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, cross the Jordan, you and this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the children of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads, I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness of this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moshe, or Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law, all the Torah, which Moshe my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law of the Torah shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written on it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for Yahweh Elohim is with you wherever you go." So God was with them. God was with them, and Israel, out of faith and obedience to what was charged to Yehoshua and to the children of Israel, they crossed over and they were able to defeat the giants. Now we're going to just flip a page here, and we're going to talk a little bit about some discoveries that were made. And we see here there are several discoveries of skeletal remains of giants that have been found in the past several hundred years. And we can see some archaeological findings back in France, 1456 Common Era, beside a river in Valence, France. They uncovered the skeletal remains of which they think was a 23-foot giant. There was a 15-footer that was found in southeast Turkey in the late 1950s, and so on and so forth. You see some skeletal size differences between present-day man and that of Goliath and Og, etc., etc. One thing that I definitely want to talk about today is this Smithsonian cover-up. And the Smithsonian scientists identified at least 17 skeletons that stood at over 7 feet in their annual reports, including one example that was 8 feet tall, and a skull with a 36-inch circumference reported from Anna, Illinois in the Smithsonian Annual Report of 1873. So even though the Smithsonian has been hiding things, they can't go back and get rid of things that they've already printed off and made known to the public, which you were able to print off and save. So this 36-inch circumference, the skull, and the average human skull is only 20 inches in circumference. So this thing was almost twice as large as a regular human skull. That just does not happen with human beings. The Smithsonian Institution is mentioned dozens more times as the recipient of enormous skeletons from across the entire United States. The skeletons mentioned no longer seem to exist regardless of their actual size, and the remaining ones that were on display were removed and repatriated by the NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. You can find this here. I quote this out of bibliotecaplanades.net. Backside here, backside here, you see the suture line here on the two parietal plates. This is what would be on a normal human being. When a baby's born, you have this, and then this middle suture line is usually soft in the back to allow for expansion of the cranial, of the skull. If we look here, these other skulls that we find have no suture line following the back, just that one plate. And this is not human. What you see here, this is not human. I found this Trey Smith God in a Nutshell project. You can find that on godinanutshell.com. Let's take a look at some megaliths for a minute to just give an idea of some things that we are just scratching the surface on, that archaeologists have uncovered, and people like the Smithsonian Institution and the Archaeologist Society that is today are, as much as possible, trying to cover up evidence that is in plain sight of things that were going on pre-flood. This place here is Baalbek in Lebanon, and you can see this structure here, this carved quartz. This is not made in nature. It is someone or something has made it. 55 feet long, 17 feet wide, 18 feet high, over 1,000 tons. Ask any modern engineer today how this could possibly be moved. There's no way it could be moved today, and it pretty much shatters the paradigm of people back then with simple flint knives and copper tools could have chiseled and moved this thing. And yet you see it at the Temple of Jupiter, which archaeologists say that the Romans built, which I believe the Romans built, but they built the top part of it. The bottom part of it has some of these stones that were found here in Baalbek and used for the base of the Temple of Jupiter. But there's no way that the Romans were able to cut and move this type of size material. Just impossible. This is pre-flood, folks. Here again is another megalithic structure, same size, over 1,000 plus tons. This is pre-Roman age remains. If you go onto another continent, down to South America, in Cusco, Peru, you see megalithic structures here. These stones that you see on these slides are stones that fit so precisely together that you couldn't put a razor blade or a piece of paper in there to fit between the gaps. And these stones are huge. We're talking, 20, 40, 80, 100-ton stones. It just defies archaeologists today. It shatters the paradigm that the Incas built this. And the Incas will tell you that they came here and it was already here when they came. Here's Sacsayhuaman, Peru, outside of modern-day Cusco, Peru. These are more interlocking walls made without mortar that withstood the pre-megalithic, the pre-flood. These pre-megalithic things survived the flood. Here's another Peruvian site. If you take a look here, this wall that you see here, that each foundation stone is about 12 feet underground. So what you see here, you have to dig another 12 feet down to see the beginning of some of these stones. And this helps enable the wall to withstand any kind of earthquake damage. And many of the stones that make up this wall here, and what I've shown you in some previous pictures, weigh up to 125 tons or more. And legend has it, and I said this before, that the Incas did not build it, but it was there before they arrived. And again, the question begs itself, how could it be possible for people with Bronze Age tools to build something that engineers today don't know how to replicate, and to even move some of this stuff and build it with modern technology? Other megalithic sites and things that are very, very interesting and defy the modern paradigm of modern archaeology is that of the giant tombs of Sardinia, some of the megalithic structures on Malta, the megalithic temples that are there, the Göbekli Tepe, and even some of the pyramids that we're finding, not just in Egypt, but we're talking like in Bosnia. I also believe at some other places in the Middle East. I'm trying to think. I thought there was one in Japan. For sure, Southeast Asia. Also, if you go over to Chichen Itza, if you go into South America, there you can find them there. They're on every continent. Every continent. Now a little bit closer to home in America, there's a book out called "The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America" by Richard J. Dewhurst. Excellent book. He gives some good archaeological proof of giants that existed that were dug up in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Another one by Fritz Zimmerman, The Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America, is another excellent book to get. But you can see here some of the discoveries in North America. We have, if you look at Catalina Island, California, over there, number 4, they found a giant there, 9'2". We're going to talk about that in a minute. Number 3, a 10-footer found in Beaver Lake, Ozarks, Arkansas. A 12-footer that was uncovered in Lompoc Rancho, California. And one that was 18 foot tall found in West Hickory, Pennsylvania. And interestingly, if you talk to any of the Indians, they have legends. And the Iroquois, the Osage, the Tuscaroras, the Hurons, the Omahas, many other North American Indians all speak of giant men who once lived and roamed in the territories of their forefathers. All over what is now the U.S. are traditions of these ancient giants. You can even go to the Hopi and Navajo Indians down in the Southwest and hear about the same thing. The authors of this website here, this bibliotecaplanades.net, they say the following. However, most people don't believe in giants, but rather scoff at the idea, saying it's all just folklore that got mixed up and sensationalized by newspaper journalists. We disagree, as there is ample evidence within Native American mythology, the Navajo, Comanche, Choctaw, and all the other Native Indians that I gave you on the previous slide. There's genetic data that can prove otherwise, ethnological studies, scientific reports, early excavation records, first-hand accounts, discoveries featured in newspapers and town history books to suggest otherwise. So what's going on? What's going on, folks, is the powers that be don't want us to know about the giants that existed. Why? Because it's going to shatter the Darwinian paradigm, is what's going to happen. Now the new thing that's coming out is the ancient astronaut theory, where we were seeded. Because really the Darwin theory is just a house of cards. It's blown up in the Darwinist face. And now what are they looking to do? They're looking to find something else. We see here, this is interesting here. I emailed L.A. Marzulli, and he was very gracious to send me back a picture of a cover-up. And this goes back to the Catalina Island, which on the previous slide, a couple slides ago, we saw that they measured this giant as 9'2". And I emailed LA asking him, can you send me something? And he responded in an email, and he said, "Hi, Chad. The only pic I've ever discovered is what I found on Catalina Island. It's a giant just under 9 feet. So anywhere from, 8 foot, 10 inches to 9'2". You can see the cover up by the museum. It doesn't get any better than this. And I highly encourage you to go to his website, lamarzulli.net. He went there, just in a nutshell, make a long story short, he went to Catalina Island, gave a donation so he could access some of the records there. And within a couple hours, down here you see he's holding a book with a picture in it. This is one of the pictures that he found there where this man uncovered a giant. He took this to 2 or 3 different independent labs where they knew that the guy that dug this up was 5'7", and they used his body and were able to kind of basically take everything that you see here with the skeleton, kind of stand it upright to get an idea of the measurement. And all 2 or 3 of these places that he sent this to for them to give an evaluation of what they thought and measure it scientifically, all came up with about, right about 9 feet, right in that area. So why then, when he went back, you can see that they cut out and cropped the picture. You don't see any kind of giant. So you see, again, it's a cover-up. They don't want you to see the truth. Here's something else very interesting. This is dated back in 2015. This just proves once again that there's a cover-up going on with the Smithsonian Institute. This is back in 2015. A U.S. Supreme Court ruling has forced the Smithsonian Institution to release classified papers dating from the early 1900s that proves the organization was involved in a major historical cover-up of evidence showing giant human remains in the tens of thousands had been uncovered all across America and were ordered to be destroyed by high-level administrators to protect the mainstream chronology of human evolution at the time. Again, Darwinism, which is a false doctrine up the yin-yang. During the court case, new elements were brought to light as several Smithsonian whistleblowers admitted to the existence of documents that allegedly proved the destruction of tens of thousands of human skeletons reaching between 6 and 12 feet in height, a reality mainstream archaeology cannot admit to for different reasons, claims AIAA spokesman James Churchward. And he explains the following here. He says, there has been a major cover-up by Western archaeological institutions since the early 1900s to make us believe that America was first colonized by Asian peoples migrating through the Bering Strait 15,000 years ago, when in fact there are hundreds of thousands of burial mounds all over America which the natives claim were there a long time before them, and that show traces of a highly developed civilization, complex use of metal alloys, and where giant human skeletons remains are frequently found but still go unreported in the media and news outlets, he explains. And you can see here a guy on the right here, a giant human femur uncovered. I wouldn't say it's human, but it is a femur uncovered in Ohio 2011 by the American Association for Alternative Archaeology, similar to the evidence presented in this court case. One thing I want to share with you is these giant Indian burial mounds. Again, as he says here, the natives claim that they were there a long time before them. And interestingly, in the early 1900s, you had a lot of amateur archaeologists going out digging up bones, and they were going to these mounds, digging up bones, finding giant bones. Smithsonian then came along, shut things down. They went and excavated, and they removed all this stuff. So again, we got a giant cover-up going on with the Smithsonian Institute. They don't want us to see the truth because it would shatter the Darwinian paradigm. Now, if we go back to the Bible, let's take a look at the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, the renewed covenant. We see some things here based on what Peter, Paul, and Jude have said. If we go to 2 Peter 2, 4 through 6, Peter writes the following, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and here hell is Tartaru in the Greek, meaning Tartarus, the only time we see this in the New Testament, and deliver them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them as example unto those that after should live ungodly. We see here, Peter understood about Genesis 6:4, what Genesis 6:4 was, that the sons of God were in fact angels. He's basically giving you information based on Genesis 6:1 through 4. Angels that sinned. How do they sin? They came down, they cohabitated with human beings, brought forth the Nephilim. Read that in Enoch, you'll see it. Jude, the book Jude, verse 6, says, the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains unto darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. So we see again, Jude is reiterating what we find in Genesis 6:1 through 4. Anybody that tells you that Genesis 6:1 through 4, that the sons of God or the sons of Seth, are not looking at their Bible. They are too heavily swayed by churchology, seminary schools, and if they look at the text for what it is, the sons of God are none other than fallen angels. Again, We see also here in 1 Corinthians 11, 7 through 10, Paul writes here, "For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the angels." And it's talking about covering their heads because of the angels. Why? Because the angels were lusting after the human beings, after the women. And we see that here. I think Paul is kind of alluding to that in that scripture. If we advance forward to the last book of the canonized scriptures, we see in Revelation the following. Revelation 6:13 that's talked about here. "And the stars of heaven fell into the earth." Stars of heaven in context here are the fallen angels, folks. So the stars of heaven fell into the earth, even as a fig tree casts her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. Revelation 9:1, "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." So the star that fell into the earth is a him. Well, if we understand it, again, that the star that fell from heaven was a fallen angel. We know what happens, that this fallen angel opens up the keys to the pit, and locust creatures come from that pit to harm mankind for 5 months. We see Revelation 9:11, it says that they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. Why was this angel in the bottomless pit? Again, we need to understand our Bibles, that there is a war going on in heaven, just like there is in the supernatural, there's a war going on the earth. We see in Revelation 9:14, the sixth angel had the trumpet. He says, "Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates." What happens? Those 4 angels go out and slay 1/3 of mankind. And again, you have to ask yourself, why are these angels, if their angels are good angels, only good angels, why are they bound? Something happened. They fell. They fell from their first estate. We have an angel in the bottomless pit. We have 4 angels that are bound at the great river Euphrates. We also know about the great dragon, the old serpent called the devil and Satan. We know about him as well. So we see that the angels are also listed in Revelation as those that were locked up, as Peter says, in Tartaru and Tartarus. And there's going to come a time when they're going to get released. Now, I know what some people are saying. Wait a second now. Angels can't procreate. And they look at this verse here in Mark and Matthew. Yeshua, they say, well, Yeshua said that angels can't procreate. And they take the verse in Mark 12, and this is in response to the Sadducees who didn't believe in the resurrection. They're asking Yeshua, which of the 7 men at the resurrection will have the wife that each of them married? And Yeshua says in Mark 12, 24 through 25, Yeshua answered and said unto them, "Do you not therefore err? You err because you don't know the Scriptures, neither the power of God. For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven." Key in on those words, folks. The angels which are in heaven. The angels which are in heaven do not procreate. The angels, however, that fell, that we see in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, backed up in the book of Enoch and Jasher and also in Jubilees, did fall from heaven. And then they procreated. So we see these verses, they don't state whether or not angels can marry or procreate. The big thing I want to share here on this slide is that they had to leave heaven to produce the offspring. That's what I want to share with you on that. He's saying angels which are in heaven. According to the book of Enoch, angels have the capability to reproduce, but God did not sanction it. The angels that fell, aka the watchers, were the ones who sinned after God's holy command. And this is in Enoch chapter 15, 1 through 7. "And he answered and said unto me, and I heard his voice, Fear not, Enoch, you righteous man and scribe of righteousness. Approach hither and hear my voice, and go say to the watchers of heaven, who have sent you to intercede for them, you should intercede for men, and not men for you. Wherefore have you left the high, holy, and eternal heaven, and lain with men, and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and taken to yourselves wives, and done like the children of earth, and begat giants as your sons? And again, God's speaking about these watchers that sin. And he says, and though you were holy, spiritual, living the eternal life, you have defiled yourselves with the blood of women, and have begotten children with the blood of flesh. And as the children of men have lusted after flesh and blood, as those also do who die and perish. Therefore have I given them wives also, that they might impregnate them, and begat children by them, that thus nothing might be wanting to them on earth. But you were formerly spiritual, living the eternal life, and immortal for all the generations of the world. And therefore I have not appointed wives for you, for as for the spiritual ones of the heaven, in heaven is their dwelling. So this kind of backs up what Yeshua said when he says that those that are in heaven don't procreate. Those that fell did. They went against God's command. So the question again is, are we in the days of Noah, and will we see giants? And Yeshua said that just as in the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. And we know what was going on in those days. And if you look here, I put in here that with the advancement of science, we can now produce genetically modified plants and clone certain animals. Essentially, the world is trying to play God through creating things that God did not create. In my opinion, this is very similar to what was going on in the pre-flood account. Militaries around the world are researching ways to expand human thresholds for pain and cognition, essentially creating a super soldier through DNA manipulation. So we got GMO stuff going on, which I am doing the best I can to not eat, because regardless of what people say, we need to feed the world. Yes, we do, but we don't need to feed the world through GMO. There is plenty of land in this world, plenty of food to be grown in this world, but again, it's controlled by the elites. And I'll get off my high horse. We'll get back to this. In 2014, the DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, they took the rare step of launching a new division, which is called the BTO, the Biological Technologies Office. The new director's mandate was to unite DARPA's many biological research projects under one roof, with a key area of focus to restore and maintain warfighter abilities, according to a press release issued at the time. I found this on the website in verse.com. You can see that here on this page. The worldly view of rushing to embrace the possibilities of cloning and embryonic stem cell manipulation may eventually bring forth giants. I'm just saying, in my opinion, I think that we're getting to that stage of the game. So in recap, the predominant view during the Second Temple period and also in the first century Common Era Judea was that the sons of God that we see in Genesis 6:4 were in fact angelic beings. They were not the sons of Seth. They were not the sons of mighty kings and rulers. They were the sons of God, aka angels. Several texts back this up. The book of Jubilees, the book of Jasher, the book of Enoch, they all sync up with the Genesis 6 account. We also know the book of Enoch, I didn't say this before, but the book of Enoch was also found during the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls to validate the other that was already used in the Ethiopian Bible canon. The book of Enoch is in the Ethiopian Bible canon, and people weren't so sure about it until the discovery of the book of Enoch and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, is not used in regards to the sons of Seth, sons of humans, as I just said before. It is used to refer to angelic heavenly beings. Now, one thing I will share with you, that is in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh. But when you get into the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, the sons of God within that context can mean the believers in Yeshua. Okay? But that is a separate issue. I'm only trying to point at what we see in the Tanakh in the Old Testament there, which we see was later validated by Peter, by Jude, and also by Paul. Giants were indeed on the earth before the flood and even afterwards. We know because of Enoch, the sons of Enoch, also Goliath and his sons, also Og, king of Bashan, etc., etc. Giant skeletal remains have been found, including within the United States. Giant bones have been uncovered on basically all the continents. They have been found and recorded and have been talked about. But unfortunately, most of these discoveries have been suppressed by the powers that be and the Smithsonian Institute, which we know has confirmed that it covered up evidence of several thousand skeletons of giants. And again, as I said, Peter, Jude, and John in Revelation talk about the angels, the fallen ones who are locked up, reserved for judgment. You can see here, interestingly, there's some similarities between the Bible and that of ancient traditions. We know that the flood happened. All these other flood traditions kind of corroborate with what the Bible has said pretty much happened. There are some differences in the story, in the narrative, but you get the point that just about every one of them, people were destroyed by water, some humans were saved, universal destruction. We see that in pretty much all the flood traditions, whether it's a full representation of biblical idea or a partial representation, but it's there. This is also interesting. I've got these next few slides that you see here from Rob Skiba's website. I found them I believe on Google Images, and I traced it back to Rob Skiba. You can see there's similarities between the Bible and that of ancient traditions. If you look at the Greek mythology chart here, we see Olympian gods had affairs with human women, resulting in demigods like Hercules and Perseus. We know that the Roman mythology, they basically stole from the Greeks, and they have a very similar genealogy tree here, where again, Olympian gods, basically watchers, angelic beings that fell, they call them the Olympian gods, and the demigods like Hercules and Perseus would be like that of the Nephilim. We see this again in Sumerian mythology. The gods had affairs with humans, resulting in demigods like Ninurtu and Marduk, aka Gilgamesh, who also could be Nimrod, and that's a whole other 2-hour conversation. Again, we see it in Egyptian mythology. These gods had affairs with humans, resulting in demigods like Osiris. Again, another name, possible name for Nimrod. We also know that Pharaoh served as a mediator between their people. The pharaohs did. They served as mediators between their people and the gods. While Pharaoh ruled, he took on the incarnation of the god Horus and the son of Re. He became Osiris at death. And then last here I have something that in the future I'm going to put together a teaching on the divine council. I think it's critical we understand that. But in Psalm 82, this makes more sense now when you understand the sons of God, the fallen angels, those that he put over the 70 nations. We read here, Psalm 82:1, a psalm of Asaph, God stands in the congregation of the mighty, or you could say, stands in the divine council. He judges among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Defend the poor and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and the needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. I have said, this is God speaking, I have said, you are Elohim, you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. And then the psalmist at the end, speaking of Yahweh, arise, O Elohim, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. We see here, I'm just going to first read what New Oxford Annotated Bible, how they comment on this. In a heavenly trial, God sentences the subordinate deities to death because of their judicial improprieties. The subordinate deities have failed to ensure justice to the needy and the oppressed. Failures in the moral realm have effects in the physical world. The gods, condemned to death, descend to Sheol and the abode of the dead. The prophet prays that God, now acting as sole judge, will provide justice among the nations. Folks, we have to wrap our mind around the fact that there is only one true Elohim, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, our Heavenly Father. He has a son, his name is Yeshua, who is the Mashiach. Yeshua is divine. He was with the Father in the beginning, before the earth and the universe was created. We have angels. Angels are also divine beings. They were given immortality. He is in his divine counsel, in God's divine counsel, he is singling them out, telling them, why are you judging unjustly? Eventually one day, if you don't do what I have told you to do here, you're going to die like men. You're going to fall like one of the princes. Again, this will be another teaching that I'm going to do in the future on the heavenly realm and the divine council. Something very, very important that we definitely need to discuss. In order to understand the hierarchy of the heavenly realm, you have to understand this. You can cause a donkey to talk to a human being out of Numbers 22 with Balaam. Do you believe in that? Do you believe what Scripture says about that? What about God causing Sarah to bear a child at 90 years of age? Can God cause manna to fall from heaven to feed millions of people that are in the barren wilderness for 40 years? What about, can God cause a whale or a large fish to swallow Jonah up and keep him alive for 3 days and nights before bringing him out on the shore still alive? Can God resurrect his only begotten Son, Yeshua, the Messiah, from the grave? If you've answered any of those and say you believe in that, then how hard is it to believe that some angels from heaven left to come to earth to procreate with human beings and produce another race called the Nephilim? It's not that difficult to believe. It really isn't. It actually makes more sense than some of the other theories being thrown around. Some extra thoughts here. Angels, the pre-flood watchers, did leave their heavenly abode to lust after the daughters of men and procreate with them. And right now, they may not be, but they were at one time locked up in Tartarus awaiting judgment. The result was a different race of beings, the Nephilim, a giant race, not human, not as what God created. And I said this before, I'm going to say it again. I believe that before Yeshua returns, our Messiah, there's going to be a DNA manipulation and a return or a rebirth of giants. And there's a good possibility that the mark that we read about in Revelation may be a vaccine that will change the DNA code in the blood, in your blood, changing the DNA that God created at the beginning for man. And once it gets in the blood, you remember Yahweh said life is in the blood, and you change your DNA, I don't know. That vaccine could be a false immortality that could possibly make someone unredeemable. I don't know. I'm just giving you my opinion. It's a corruption of the creation of God. I mean, what happened when God told Israel to go into the land of Israel, defeated all those people, killed a whole bunch of people, not just men and women, but children as well, and animals. We see here that the fallen angels, aka the Watchers, are going to be released from the bottomless pit in the end days. And it's my opinion also that what we've got going on here, that the demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim who are not redeemable. I don't believe the Nephilim are redeemable, mainly because the Nephilim were procreated from angelic beings and not from God. This is what we've got going on right now, demonic activity. Human men have the Y chromosomes that came from Adam, that came from God. Nephilim have a different Y chromosome that comes from angelic beings, and not the same. As I said before, life is in the blood. No matter what the adversary has planned, God is greater, and he will get the glory. Amen? So I hope and pray that this teaching was a blessing to you. Again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are several other people that have done a much better job than what I have explaining this stuff. People like L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, just to name a few. And there's many, many more out there. But these next two slides that you see here, I have on here references and other books that I'd strongly encourage you to take a look at. Add that to your library. And I'm going to go to the next screen, and you'll see some more links to things. But until we meet again next week, I hope and pray that this was a blessing to you. Please hit comment, like, subscribe. I look forward to reading your comments. And until we meet again next time, may Yahweh bless you and keep you. Shalom.